In the last video, we ended up drawing this crate in SketchUp. Now, if you have some scraps laying around, you can build one of these crates very easily. And if you haven't seen that video, the card will be up in the upper right-hand corner for you to go watch. The material that I have left over laying around is 1x8 tongue and groove, and we need to remove these tongues and grooves. Now I have almost all the tongues off. Those are very easy to see. The groove part, you kind of need to lean in a little bit, look at it. There is a V notch, at least on my boards, that I need to take off. Since these were scrap pieces, I have one piece left over that I really couldn't cut down. It broke in the center, so we're going to try to trim it and still use it. Okay, so we have all of our pieces cut down. I have some clamps laid down, similar to a pipe clamp, but a bar. I have 5 pieces cut for each end. So let's glue these together. We're going to edge glue these. Now, I didn't take any special precautions. I'm just going to glue them. I trimmed them with my table saw. They'll butt together fine. Run a bead of glue down, and then we're going to smooth it out with our finger. I want to mate these two together, so don't forget to glue both sides. We're going to have a little bit of glue squeeze out. Now, one thing I like to do is make sure I get right at the end. A lot of people forget to get right down at the end, and then they end up with kind of a weak point or an open spot in the board when they glue it. If you're clamping together and you've got a decent amount of pressure, you don't need to over tighten or anything, but you should be able to at least make that bond with glue. And if you've ever played with some of the glue, it's much heavier than any kind of nail fastener. It's much stronger. You'll end up breaking the wood before you break the glue in most cases. Now we're going to speed this up. There's no reason for you to watch all of this. We're going to skip ahead. Catch you in a bit. A mistake I spotted and fixed. If you notice, my lower right spacer is actually turned, whereas the left one is letting my board rest inside my clamps. I didn't notice this, but I do fix it. So I'm going to take a piece of scrap dunnage for the top and the bottom and use some smaller clamps to help kind of hold it down so it doesn't bow up in the center. A lot of the times when you're putting clamping pressure on a board that's flat and you're trying to glue them edge, they like to try to jump out in the middle or arch out. Then they'll just pop out of your clamps. You'll get an inconsistent board. So I'm going to go ahead and clamp the center here. I'm also going to end up grabbing some small dunnage pieces. We're going to try to slip one inside each of the ends here, and then we're going to end up clamping it on the outsides just to try to flatten down the edges and make sure all of our boards glue together very well. We don't want to have too much work sanding it down. Everybody hates sanding. It's not fun. It does leave you with a nice product, but there's no reason to try to overdo it. So we're going to clamp these down nice and good. We're going to try to space them out in between each of the seams so that way it puts even pressure where they meet. So it is always good to have a good selection and collection of clamps. I've got, I think, 6 of these little 6-inch clamps and a couple of squeeze clamps to get the job done. So after everything's dried up and ready to go, this is sat for about a day, I'm going to end up taking a screwdriver and try to chisel out any of this excess glue along these grains. I would typically use a set of chisels here, however, I used my last chisel as a pry bar and, well, it's no longer with us. It got thrown in the trash. A flathead screwdriver, something good, easy to grip, is going to be just fine. Just knocking it out before we sand again, just trying to save on them sanders just a little bit. Just go nice and easy, take your time, just give it a good little pressure, bump it here and there, and try to knock those big chunks out. That's all we're really after. We'll sand down some of that surface stuff, but these big chunks will really clog up that sandpaper real fast, and you'll be switching out discs or squares or whatever kind of sander you're using. Now my pieces of board did cause some pull out in the wood, but we'll sand all that clean as well. Time for the oh-so-loved sanding. I have one of these cheap orbitals I bought from Walmart. It does the job just fine. Just going to try to knock off the big spots of glue, sand everything down nice and smooth. Do your best to sand with the grain. It's going to cause a much better finish. You can go back and forth across if you have to, but just make sure to always end going with the grain. Everything will clean up a lot nicer when it comes down to the finished product. Now, I don't ever finish these items because I have kids and they destroy stuff, so I like to leave it so it's easy to sand down again and keep using. So I'm going to take these pieces. I've already done this one. I'm going to take this one over to the saw. We're going to square up the edges, just true them up a little bit. I leave my pieces a little bit long so that way I can cut them on the chop saw or the table saw, whichever your preference is. I've got a nice compound sliding saw and it can make a pretty square cut. Let's pre-drill our holes and fasten our first board onto. We're fastening the top board. I've got the other side kind of piled in some other boards so that way it can be used to help me hold this board. It's always great to have 8 hands, but you only end up with 2 in most cases. So I've got my top on here. We're going to end up trying to fasten our bottom. The one thing is we got to remember is our very bottom boards are going to overlap these bottoms. So we want to make sure that we have them set nice and flush to the edge.
I always countersink when I'm drilling close to edges, which obviously this project, the whole thing is.
Now I like my top and bottom boards to be my strongest ones, so any defects in a board, I'm going to set these ones off to the side, and I'm going to try to grab a clean edge. I want to make sure
I
that
always
this
want my
screw
top
at the
and bottom
bottom
to be
never
my
comes
strongest
loose or
members.
pulls out.
So if I've got a small defect, I'll always try to push that one to a metal board.
There, now that we have our tops and bottoms in place, now let's start setting our center boards. One thing I like to use here is a cut-off piece from when I was cutting my 1x8. I will try to make sure I get at least one piece that's the correct gap for what I'd like to set my boards to. I can then use that piece to space out my boards to the boards I've already fastened. Once those are in place, just fasten them down and keep moving towards the center. And just rinse and repeat until you get all the way there. You should be able to do your bottoms, your sides all the same way. Start with your outside boards, work your way in towards the center, keeping an even spacing. With my bottom outside boards, I like to end up putting one screw into the outside and one screw into the side board. That way at least I'm making sure that that board, when it gets loaded, doesn't try to push out away from the bottom and create a sharp lip. Alright, now remember our handles. We want to come 3/4 of an inch down from the top, and the bottom of our handle is going to be 2 1/4 inch down from the top. That should put our handle space at 1 1/2 inch. Now I apologize for my dirty and grungy appearance here. I've been working on a couple of trucks and, well, also trying to put the content together for this video, so please forgive me on that, and, well, these are my dirty work clothes. Now I use a combination square to set my measurements. It's just a little bit easier. I've used it in other items. It's very, very handy. Some people hate these things, but I find it handy as heck. So again, 3/4 down and 2 1/4 down from the top again. In between there would give us 1 1/2 inch. Now in order to make my hole, I'm going to be using a 1 1/2 inch Forstner bit. So the big deal here is to try to find the center of my board and to try to find the center of my handle. So we've got about 7 1/4. So we're going to end up measuring it 7 1/8 is what my inside measurement ends up being. Now the reason I use a Forstner bit to plow through this material is a spade bit will end up chewing out and blowing out the other side, even with a piece of dunnage underneath like I currently have it. Use that dunnage piece to help with the blowout, but a Forstner bit is a much cleaner hole. Now it takes a great deal more pressure to get through your material, but it leaves a much cleaner finish on both sides of your cut. Now I'm going to try using a can here to trace out my rounded edges. This part really isn't necessary if you're going to be using a Forstner bit like I'm using. You can just step your hole sideways as long as you've drawn a center line. Making sure that your handles end at the same point is more important. This didn't work out as well as I had thought it might, but you try stuff and you rinse and repeat, or realize it doesn't work so you don't do it again. So overall, my hole will end up being 3 inches wide as we've drawn on our SketchUp in the last video. Links up in the top right corner if you'd like to watch that before this. In order to make the bump outs that you're going to get from doing 3 cylinders, I'm going to be using my oscillating tool to clean those up. Now don't worry, yeah, it's going to be a little jagged and whatnot, but we're going to clean that up here in just a minute. So with this crate, I'm going to cut these out, and then once I'm done, we're going to end up using a router. Just a little trim router with a round over bit to kind of clean these up and even up the holes. Now I'd recommend, if you're going to be using a router like this or anything like that, try to find more of a center point of your board. Get close as you can, that way at least your roundovers on both sides feel the same, they're the same depth, have the same radius to them. Many people, when using a router, trim router, end up getting tear out jumps, such like make sure to use just constant even downwards pressure and move it clockwise around your hole or edge or whatever the case may be. Never go backwards. You'll have that thing jump, it might jump out of your hand, and that thing's spinning at 10,000 RPMs plus. It can be very dangerous, so please be careful. I always find the outer edges to be the most fun to do. You get a nice good long stroke, and it just looks so nice as you start cleaning off these edges. Instead of being a rough and rowdy piece of work, it really brings it together and makes it real nice and clean. So here's what the finished product looks like. Again, I don't stain any of my stuff or seal it. I'd rather the kids get it dirty, mess it up, and then I just sand it again. So thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this. Please subscribe, like, or comment. Have a great day.